Hello, everyone. Happy Friday afternoon, and welcome to this artist panel between four Canadian artists who have work up in the exhibition Crossroads, which is on exhibition in the main gallery at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba until November 12th. So there's just 1 week left to come and experience this fabulous exhibition with a whopping 48 artworks in person. I don't think I'll get much argument from this crowd if I say that fiber art really should be seen close up. So come on down if you have the chance until November 12th. My name is Lucie Lederhendler. I'm the curator here at the AGSM, which is located in the city of Brandon on Treaty 2 territory, the homeland of the Métis Nation, as well as lands that are traditionally shared by the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people. Joining me today are artists from across the continent, coming at us from the territories of the Stoney Nakoda, the Salix people of the Okanagan Nation, as well as the Haudenosaunee, Neutral, Mississauga, and Assiniboine peoples. For all of you joining us online, please feel free to engage in the conversation via the comments section of whichever platform you're on, and we'll be able to see all of those messages here. So let's get into it. We have a lot of ground to cover. Let me invite up our four artists, Daniela Tiger, Diana Bartelings, Pat Hertzberg, and Jaynie Himsl. Hanna Yokozawa Farquharson from Saltcoats, Saskatchewan, was going to be joining us today, but unfortunately she is not going to be able to make it, so we'll have to carry on without her. So if we may start with Daniela, I'm just going to ask you all to introduce yourself and speak briefly about your artistic journey and how you ended up here. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Lucie. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I live in Toronto, and I was born in Venezuela, but I was raised in Montreal. I came to school in Toronto and fell in love and just stayed here, made this my home. My first career was as a clinical social worker. And for over 30 years, I had the privilege of helping families with their children walk through life's journeys, ups and downs. And I think I ended up in this career because I'm very fascinated by the ties that bind us together, the threads that connect us, and the threads that get frayed over time. And so I just was fascinated by the stories that I would be told and really saw it as a privilege. Eventually, I retired from social work and went back to school, to art school, and ended up just falling in love with every single studio at art school because I had been a maker truly all my life since I was very, very young. And so explored the clay studios, the plastic studios, silversmithing, but my home was really the fiber studio, and I graduated with that. As my specialty, I focusing on surface design techniques. And again, I think just because of the tactile nature of thread and the omnipresence of cloth, cross-culturally, cloth really binds us together. We all use cloth for warmth, for comfort, and the tactile nature of it is what keeps me as a fiber artist.
Yeah, I love anybody who's read basically any of my art writing ever knows that I'm very, very interested in those object metaphors. And what's happening in the main gallery right now, very much about thread. It's interesting that you used the word thread when you were talking about life before textile art.
Absolutely.
And then went back to just the materials in the end.
Yes. For me, it acts as a metaphor in so many different ways. And it's just where I come from and where I stay. I'm very interested in connections, connections between human beings. It's my constant fascination and preoccupation.
I can't hear Lucie, so I'm not sure.
Okay, it looks like my audio is struggling.
Okay.
So, Diana, I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Okay. So I'm Diana Bartelings. I was born in Whitehorse up in the Yukon, but I was raised in Vancouver for all my schooling years. I had no idea I actually had an artistic bone in my body until I was married and had children. And at that point, I was living where I live now, which is in Rock Creek, BC. It's a tiny little community on the border of the Okanagan and the United States of Washington. I've taken a lot of courses with different textile teachers from around the world, really. And I've just learned so much. And in all that learning, trying to create my own voice has been something that I've been working towards. And yeah, I love working with fabric and fiber. I actually collect fiber art from other artists as well and hang it on my walls. And yeah, I just really appreciate it.
Speaking of object metaphors, I love this idea of an artistic bone. I know it's kind of a cliche, but as though there's a bone, right? That turns you into an artist. Yeah. So thanks, Diana. Pat, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, let's see. I started out, I began sewing, let's say, at age 6 and making Barbie doll clothes. I don't know if any of you remember that. Sewing them by hand. And then when my mother finally let me get my hands on her sewing machine at about age 10, I began making my own clothes. I've been an artist from my earliest memories. Even in kindergarten, grade school, my teachers used to hold up my work as an example to the other students, which was embarrassing, but it kind of identified me as an artist. And so I've seen myself as an artist all my life. I went to art school. When I graduated from art school, I couldn't imagine supporting myself as a fine artist. And I just struggled to shake that image of the starving artist in a rat-infested, ghetto. But I'd always loved fashion. And so I enrolled in a fashion design program. And once I graduated, I actually got a job, like a real job, and it had a salary. And so I was thrilled. And I ended up spending a number of years in the fashion industry. For the first half of my career, I was a fashion designer for a number of Canadian women's wear manufacturers. And it was while I was designing clothes that I would experiment with different surface design treatments on the plain fabrics that I was using. And remember, this was the 70s, which I hate to date myself, but it was the 70s when tie-dyeing and block printing, silk screening, and sublisstatic printing were coming into their own. I could dream up these novel surface designs, and there were companies that would make it in large quantities for production. So it was heaven. I was having a ball and playing, experimenting, discovering new fabric surfaces and treatments. And remember, this was before YouTube and before Google and before the internet and even before computers. So little did I know that at the same time as I was doing all this experimenting and creating, that other artists around the world were doing the same thing. And we were all creating a new art form, which would later become known as contemporary fiber art. And that's how I differentiate it from a lot of people. When they think of fiber art, they think of quilting, traditional quilting and embroidery and weaving, all the traditional fiber arts. but I see myself as a contemporary fiber artist, as many people are who are in this show. I was in Montreal. I was a single, free-spirited Montreal fashion designer with a dream job, a great salary, a fabulous apartment in a city that I loved and a life that I loved. And it was at this epic point in my life that a wonderful young man asked me to marry him and move to Toronto. And so it was a profound, life-altering decision, but it was a crossroad I decided to commemorate with my Grand National Crossroads piece called Tying the Knot.
Yeah, we'll look closer at that piece later, but I love this. First of all, it's a struggle that I see with the young people in my job as well, of the practical of being an artist. I think that there is no longer any romance in this youngest emerging generation of the roach-infested starving artist style. But we're going to talk later about that bridge between art and craft and kind of functional. You think about your practice as being functional or expressive, and the bridge between those two, how you negotiate those two things. Thanks a lot, Pat. Jaynie, would you like to introduce yourself to us?
I'm Jaynie Himsl. I'm from Saskatchewan. I've lived all my life on the prairies. I come to fiber arts because I've been surrounded by it all my life, with sewing and all other needle crafts, and I come from the sewing side of it. It wasn't until about 15 years ago when I saw an exhibition in my hometown of a Saskatchewan artist, fiber artist, and art made using her sewing machine, and that was my light bulb moment, and that's what I need to do with my skills. So that's the direction I didn't know I had artistic skills, and I've been developing them, and seems I do.
So let me come right back at you and start the conversation with this question about using old methods and tools and skills in order to express contemporary experience artistically. What do you think about what do you think is special about that relationship between the traditional and the innovative?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I can't separate them in my head because that's just what I know. I've tried other things, little classes, painting and pottery and whatever, and I discovered those aren't for me. They're messy. They aren't for me. And whatever. I've seen plenty of fiber art, and it's where I'm comfortable.
Yeah. So I'm thinking more in terms of do you all of the art that's in the main gallery right now, all of this exhibition is fiber art. It's not fiber creation. You couldn't put a single quilt on the bed. You couldn't make a pillowcase out of any of the felt. So do you also use those skills to produce something more in the family of craft?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
When I need a no-brainer project, that's when I.
Okay.
Yeah. Between artistic that takes a lot of thinking, and sometimes you just need to follow instructions and do what I'm told, and simple, easy.
That's such an interesting distinction. Yeah, go.
I was going to say that I totally understand you, Jaynie. I feel like I'm opposite to that. Like when I see an instruction, I work on how can I make it mine? Like how can I change it in some way so that it reflects exactly me? And I, in fact, often I'll look at an instruction and then I'll see where I can sort of digress, where I can take it and change it. And that's probably why right from the beginning, I did look at the fiber arts and I admire these beautiful, beautiful pieces that people do in the traditional fiber art world. And especially, I don't know if you've ever been down to Houston. Houston has a phenomenal fiber quilt exhibition on every year. And the first time I went down there, I can say it was like I was born again, because those traditional quilts, to me, suddenly I realized the incredible beauty and skill level to produce these minute little, these points that come together perfectly. I could never do that. Like I don't have the patience or even the interest to do that. But anyways, what about you, Daniela?
It's interesting that you say that, Pat. I see it more from, I guess, because of my background, I see it more as a psychological connection. Like when I'm working with a needle and thread, I feel like I am imbuing in the work all the historical context. Like, not to sound too esoteric, but to me, we have a very deep heritage behind us that props us up when we do our work. So although what we are trying to create is new and unique and modern and of today, we acknowledge that working with needle and thread is something that has been in humanity's existence for tens of thousands of years. We have been creating cloth from thread. We have been sewing cloth together to cover ourselves and keep ourselves warm and shelter us. And so it's a very rich heritage that this work comes from. And I think that is in everything that we create, that heritage. It sustains our work.
Diana, did you want to add?
Well, I mean, I do some traditional quilting, very little, because that is not where my interest lies. When I started doing the art, it consumed my life. It is what I want to do. It's all I really want to do. Unfortunately, I'm working other jobs, so that doesn't get to happen all the time. But I still do some traditional quilting for special occasions. My son is getting married next year. I'm making a paper piece traditional wedding ring quilt for their wedding. I will probably have some tweaks in it, which will make it a little different, to make it my own and to make it theirs. She comes with 2 children, so I have these 2 lovely grandchildren now. So I've made them each a quilt to give them at the wedding as well. Mm-hmm. Right. But for me, I think to do a traditional piece, there has to be a really strong attachment. Otherwise, I'm really not interested. I really want to, the free time I have, which I feel is so little, I want to pursue the art.
But Diana, sorry to jump in here, but Diana, that's exactly what I was trying to express, which you expressed much better in a very concrete way, that that this double wedding pattern has great meaning. It's about joining 2 families. It has a lot of weight behind it. And so you've chosen this pattern to give your son as a gift as he starts his new life. So to me, that's bringing the heritage forward and creating something new with the heritage.
There was a very famous exhibition called Anonymous Was a Woman in the mid-70s that has a wonderful catalog associated with it. So the curator found mostly quilt art and then paired it with private writings by women, right? And published it. It was republished, the catalog, in the 90s with a new foreword that said, I bet that this art is going to become legitimate art soon, any day now. And I think that it's wonderful that now 30 years after, we are sitting and having this conversation. And I think that to your point, very, very important that you remember that these are skills that have always been art and are only just stepping up, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Or I should say, the space is being created for them to walk in.
Exactly.
So, yeah, this idea of not having a creative bone in your body and being surrounded by things that you made by hand in order to create beauty, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I've said I don't. We didn't get pronouns with the exhibition, but as far as I can tell, it's entirely, if not vast majority, women of the 46 artists who are included in Crossroads, and certainly not the only people that participate in fiber arts. But something about this gathering has specified that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this exhibition worked towards the theme of Crossroads. Pat spoke to that a little bit. So it sounds like yourself, Pat, that you chose to create something from scratch on this theme. I wanted to ask, when you're not working towards a theme, we are going to look at all the work that you made specifically for the exhibition. But before that, when you're not working towards the end of an exhibition like this, what is it that sparks your interest? What makes you want to sit down? This is another thing about that slow process, those slow processes, that idea of filling the free time with these really labor and time intensive projects. I'll start with Daniela, because Diana and Jaynie kind of spoke to that already, but let's go into more specifics. Daniela?
So what am I inspired by? Often I'm inspired by my travels, the photos, hundreds of photos that I take as I travel around the world. I've been incredibly fortunate to visit far-flung places. But my greatest inspiration is really the connections to other people. As I travel, often guides are interested in showing us incredible man-made buildings, man-made creations, or earth-made nature, gorgeous trees and forests and rivers, and which I am very inspired by. But mostly I come back to when I have a little connection with a person from another country, when I have a chat and learn about a culture that is different than mine. And truthfully, that at the end of the day is really what inspires me to create.
So the sharing of a beauty that's experienced, and the beauty that's experienced is augmented by the person-to-person connections.
Person-to-person connection is really what always touches my heart.
Okay. And Diana, you spoke about the commission you've given yourself, but also about just being uninterested in doing things if they're not generated by the artistic spark.
True. And I mean, I've tried to do some exercises, as I was exploring abstract art, of just making the art. And I really discovered that I like to have a reason to make my art. And a lot of my art is a commentary on a social political issue, things that are happening in the world around me that I have strong feelings about, that I am responding to. I guess that's what inspires me if I'm not working towards a show. I do have a series that I'm working on to develop a body of work, and I just feel like that I'll never be able to make all the art I'd like to make.
That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you could always switch to digital. But not that digital doesn't take time, but it's not
No,
like
I'm sure it
can't.
would take me more time.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Jaynie?
My inspiration would be landscape and, like Diana, different things that concern me, predominantly environmental change. It worries me. And,
Do you
or lack of attention being paid specifically.
Mm-hmm. Do you, well, again, I keep teasing the art that we're going to look at. It'll come, but do you consider your footprint and your materials? It seems like
yes, I use mostly repurposed fabrics.
That's a beautiful thing about
wherever.
it.
Yeah.
And Pat?
Well, I live north of Toronto in an area called the Caledon Hills, and I used to live in Toronto. In fact, I lived in an urban forest, so it was a very, very forested area where I hardly ever saw the sky because there were huge old oak trees that surrounded me. And when we moved up to Caledon, I was completely in awe of the sky and all the, like every time you turn a corner, there's another sort of exquisite landscape. And so a lot of my pieces have been inspired by the landscape, sometimes the sky. I mean, lately I've been doing a number of pieces. I think it's going to be a body of work that is based on colors in the sky. In other words, dawn and dusk and sunset. And so the more my work becomes abstracted, the more I'm working with color and texture. And so the inspiration is really just the beginning. I mean, it's what sort of brings me in. But I have produced over the years a number of pieces that are in response to environmental issues that I feel very strongly about, like you, Jaynie. They move me enough that I feel compelled to produce a piece of art that when it's in a gallery, it will initiate conversation and just get people talking and thinking about these issues. And I think, and that keeps happening, but that's not a dependable thing. Like that's whenever I'm moved by it. So it's a combination of things. And I think overall, my love of texture and color combining, like the juxtaposition of one color against another, those things really excite me. And those things are the things that I work on in the piece. But the actual theme of a piece is often either a show that comes up with a theme or as I say, landscapes and social issues.
And it seems from what you said before about your background that there must be a certain amount of your work that's driven by experimentation.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
A little bit of innovation, especially when you're doing these dyeing techniques. I'm sorry, I don't have the vocabulary. You call it surface work, maybe?
Right. Surface design. Yeah.
Surface design. Yeah. I guess the follow-up to that would be, how do you know if something's not working?
Oh, you mean, as when you're experimenting?
Yeah.
You know pretty quickly. If it isn't working, it's not working. But often too, I will push something even when I don't like it. And often I don't like what I'm working on in the first, say, half of doing it. I'm kind of not happy very often, but I know that if I just keep at it, that I can overcome some of the problems or some of the areas that aren't working. But actually just recently I had a piece. I don't often have pieces that I just consider garbage. Like I usually end up with work that I'm very happy and proud of. But I did have a piece not long ago that I was a pure experimentation, and I hate it. It came out and I thought, no, this is not going to see a wall anywhere. And I'll probably end up cutting it up and producing something else with it. But yeah, usually I think I know.
I have experienced an arc as well. So that really speaks to me, your comment, where you start with an idea in your head, and then what gets created it falls so short of the idea that at some point, Pat, I know exactly what you mean. You just think, oh, this is not going where you want it to go. But if you manage to push through that point, you can sometimes come up at the other end and come up with something that is closer to what you had imagined. It never matches, but it gets better if you can push through.
I think there's a turning point, I think, where you might start a piece. This is me speaking, but if I start a piece and it's working sort of, but it's not really working, I think there is a tradition or a transition point where I give up my preconceived idea of what it was going to look like. And I let it take its direction. Like I let it become what it's going to be. And it's an act of faith because you're putting a lot of time into it, but it's still something that I have confidence that it's going to work. But that's an interesting process that I think would be worth discussing with other artists if they do let go of their work as they're working and say, okay, where is this going to go?
I've often heard writers talk about that process where they create the characters in their novels, but then the characters lead them to where the book needs to go, and that there's this unleashing of the characters. And they speak of them as if they're being separate from themselves, like they're just the tool doing the writing, but the characters are telling them where the book is going to go.
Yeah.
Jaynie or Diana, do you have any insights into when to throw it out, when to keep working, when to have faith, when to lose all hope?
I think that a friend of mine one time, I was really struggling with a piece and she said, just add some more. And I just kept adding more. And eventually, I mean, she was right. Just keep working at it. Eventually, you're going to get somewhere. It might not be what you initially thought, right? But I've learned that if I look at my sketchbook and I look at my finished pieces, I don't think there's one thing that looks like the original drawing. Right. My stuff, unless I'm doing a really strong representative piece of a photograph, my work it does have a life of its own and off it goes.
Similarly, there's not many things that my pieces that they're garbage, but just follow my instinct. That's what I found is just, and walk away sometimes, just walk away and just, and come back, whatever, the next day and like, oh, this and this and this. It comes to you at night at 2 a.m. or something like that.
Daniela, sorry.
It's not it's not like I don't have UFOs, right? Things that I've never finished, but I think I learned what I needed to from them and I have no desire to finish them. Yeah.
I think it depends too on the technique that you're using. For example, if you're doing silk screening, it has to be, you have this idea of what you want to put on your silk screen and print. It's going to be what you wanted it to be because it has to be, other than the color, but it's going to be pretty close to what you initially imagined. But other techniques allow more serendipitous movement, I think, creatively. So it depends on your techniques that you're using.
Right, because it's possible for a screen print to just not work.
Well, that's true
It doesn't.
too.
It doesn't come out. Yeah, yeah.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
and that's subjective. We could do this forever, it turns out, but I would like to make sure that we have a chance to see all the work in depth. So I'm just going to pop at random Jaynie's work onto the screen and ask you to walk us through 1,000 steps. So again, this is the 2021 exhibition. So most of this work was made in 2020, which we all know was kind of defined by a pandemic and isolation. But this is why I asked about the repurposing of materials, Jaynie. So why don't you walk us through this one?
Well, the repurposing of materials is just because I like to collect what I like. So that's what ends up in my stash from whatever, people giving it away or me picking it up secondhand or whatever. The inspiration for this one, well, Crossroads, I made it specifically with this exhibition in mind, hoping it would get in. But at the time, it was addictions run in my family. Several close family members have addictions of one sort or another. And it was really bothering me. And it helps me to express myself in fabric. So I just started piecing together random bits of fabric in the red family, and with each piece of cloth that I would select, and I would make a conscious decision with each seam. Does this one belong here? Yes or no, and then pick a different one if they didn't belong together. And sort of don't think too much, just yes or no, do these two belong together? And that's how I created it, make a whole bunch of little pieces and then eventually put them all together. And my idea was that all the little daily choices we make in our lives make us who we are. They affect our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, what we eat, who we hang out with, what we choose to do with our time. They all affect us profoundly. Eating a whole bucket of ice cream one day isn't going to make one difference in your life for one day, but if you continually do that, it's going to make a profound difference in your life. So that's where my crossroads was, in the small daily decisions that we choose to make. And it ended up with somewhat of a cup look there. I thought that was appropriate, just a cup, meaning, this is our life, us. And the buttons I've added, again, each one selected individually and placed by my instinct, here. Each was a conscious choice. So that's my explanation of the piece. And I chose reds because I just felt like using reds that particular day when I was starting out. And that's my crossroads, was these small daily decisions.
So we have a Facebook user who is relating to you. They say, I have many buttons, and that you've given them ideas on how to preserve that meaning, as they too were affected by addictions that shaped their life. So that's interesting, this idea of the button as a small personal token, right? Because it's an item that you have maybe ignored, but that somebody may have carried around with them for so long. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. At random. There we go. Diana, the journey.
The journey. So this piece is, I'm going to use some words that, we've already talked about earlier, but I really like the juxtaposition between the rusted cotton fabric kind of the harshness that made that piece of fabric and the soft, supple silk that is appliqued onto it. These two pieces of fabric were created at the same time to some extent. The rested fabric was created on its own, and then I put it on the print table beside the silk. And I really like to use something called breakdown screen printing. And so I did both these pieces of fabric at the same time. And I think that's why they work so well together. Even though they're completely different, they were made by the same screen at the same time. And as it was breaking down and the dye was being released onto the fabric, it just creates that cohesiveness between the two completely different fabrics. Mm-hmm. I made this piece for this exhibit. I started with my little stepping stones, and I wanted my crossroad to be a big wide road instead of little stepping stones. Because sometimes we hit a wall when we're going through life, and sometimes we need to go over it, and sometimes we need to go through it. And so I put that big strip up there and did the hand stitching to sort of indicate a bit of a highway there with lots of traffic, creating a block of sorts to get to the other side. I then added the circle, and the circle really reminded me of a song that my mom loved, and it was called By the Light of the Silvery Moon. And that song, once I had that thought, went through my head for days. And I realized that this piece was really more about her journey than mine. And if you can see just below the silver moon and where the two middle blocks are of the stepping stones, it almost looks like there's a woman with a red dress there with black hair. And I can just totally see that being my mom, all dressed up and in her pretty dress. And yeah. So she struggled, like Jamie talked about, addictions in her family. My mom had a difficult life. Many people do. And her go-to became alcohol. And unfortunately, this piece is about her journey and making a decision at a crossroad that was very difficult. She chose to end her life. And so that one block on the other side of the wall, it doesn't have a pathway through it. It just has the little diamond in it. And that is just, she's finally at rest. She's done her struggle. She pushed through, and as difficult as it was for us, and still is all these years later, if she was so unhappy, we would never have wished her back. And we loved her very much. And a lot of people loved her very much. But yeah, so this is in honor of her and her difficult decision she made.
Thank you. Not to deviate from that story, from the meaning behind it, but for people who are not experiencing this in person, who aren't able to, it's also remarkably smooth. There's the stitching, I think everybody can kind of see, is quite minimal. Can you talk about the process, the materials?
Sure. So the silk, as I said, I appliqued the silk on. So I actually put a stabilizer behind the silk, and then I stitched it on. And the silk is really smooth. I did not want to put a lot of stitching in it. The cotton itself, even though it was rust dyed before I screen printed it, has a smoothness to it. You know, by the time you wash it out, it was a repurposed piece of fabric actually that I rust dyed and then I screen printed on. So a lot, I think, of the weaving has smoothed out over the years, and that's what gave it such a smooth, soft feeling, even for a rust fabric. So, and then I just did some machine stitching around that moon, just almost like a Fibonacci spiral there.
Oh, my mic was muted. I'm sorry. I did want to say, Tracy, who's joining us on YouTube, is reminded that we all suffer and that there's a link to common humanity. And she thanks you for sharing your story. And now, Pat, tying the knot.
Yes, well, I guess I should start by saying each time friends of mine separate and divorce, and we've had a lot of friends who have, I go through a kind of grieving period. I really do. The breakdown of a once happy relationship affects me quite profoundly on a sort of visceral level. Now, my piece, Tying the Knot, explores the topic of marriage and the challenges and sacrifices we all make in order to maintain a healthy, lasting relationship. This art piece, with its busy, complicated composition, represents the complexity, and with its abundance of open space, represents the fragility of uniting two lives. Tying the Knot was made from 2 wedding gowns that were donated to me to rip and cut up for my art. The fabrics from these gowns were beautiful, and they are beautiful. Silks, velvets, satins, chiffons, tulles, all initially unembellished. It's a white piece, and so I couldn't work on color very much, but I did put my attention to composition and texture. I started by covering all of these plain fabric strips with a wide variety of free motion embroidery. I just went to town, stitching each strip with a different pattern. Besides the aesthetic purpose of the stitching, it also served a practical purpose of connecting the strips together. So structurally, even though the piece looks really fragile, it's actually quite sturdy. The stitching itself and the fabric puckers that the stitching creates add substantial texture to the piece. And even though this art piece reads as all white, a white color, it is actually an assortment of various shades of white, which, when placed all together, provides a very subtle textural complexity. And as well, the different fabrics all reflect a different type of light from their surface. And the different surfaces, like velvet, for example, absorbs light, and the satin reflects it. So it contributes, those combinations and combining them contributes to a visual texture as well. And then lastly, the thread that I used in the piece, it may seem imperceptible from the distance we're looking at it now, but I used different shades of white and off-white thread, which provides an additional really subtle textural dimension.
Pat, can I ask how big this piece is?
I think it's about 36 by 36.
Wow.
And I do want to, we actually couldn't tell before we got it, but it's it's not solid. So all of the triangle forms that you see are actually the white wall behind it.
Yes, and actually, most of my work uses this technique, and I often ask the gallery to hang it away from the wall by like an inch or 3/4 of an inch, because the shadows are a large part of the work. I really like having the shadows in there. And you're right, if it's hung on a white wall, I did a whole series of whites, and this was the last one I did. And I really like the effect of how they look against a white wall because of the shadow, and any kind of a pastel wall still creates shadow, but on a dark wall, it's a completely different look.
Absolutely. Well, like all of these materials on top of skin as opposed to on their own hanger, right? They, the white accommodates other colors, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, I wanted to produce this to basically point out the challenges. Like the knots are a part of the difficulty. Like life is never straightforward, and it's never easy. But if we hang on, if we hang in there, we can make it. I mean, I have this theory, and so far it's working for me. But that issue of people divorcing and giving up on their relationship is, I don't know why, but it is actually a very strong, like I have a really hard time when friends of ours announce that they're splitting up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's true, because I think when people are a couple, we tend to associate them that way. And when they're splitting up, I think your loyalty is torn as well. And I agree. I find it very difficult when that happens as well.
And also the, well, sort of there, but for the grace of God, we all know it's difficult. And
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you've expressed it really well with this piece.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, certainly not least, here we have Daniela's piece. Where are we going from here? From 2018.
So this work was inspired by the political situation that I was so dismayed by, and the tremendous impact that the American politics have on the entire world, really. Canada being the neighbor, especially affected by the turmoil in the United States, and the unbelievable amount of refugees that were fleeing and continue to flee from war-torn places. And in my mind, I saw all these people standing on a precipice, not knowing what to do, whether to stay, whether to go, whether to run, whether to hang in there. And not so dissimilar from what Pat is saying, but on a more macro level. Like, when do you hang in on a marriage, and when do you call it quits? And how long do you work at a situation before you realize that it's an impossible situation and you have to run? So where are we going from here can be seen on many different levels. But I was just, I was moved to express it in a physical way, because I was so emotionally overwrought by the world helmet that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, although I made it many years ago, I see no end in sight. So in terms of technique, I've got some surface design, printing techniques, dyeing techniques. My work usually begins just with plain white cotton. And so when you see a color or a shade, that's something that I put onto the fabric. And the figures are all drawn with thread in a free motion technique. So Lucie, I don't know if you can get any closer, but if there's any magnification possibilities, but
Not at this
is
point,
a
no.
whole row of figures who are standing on what appears to be the edge of some world.
This is one of many pieces that has a freehand text component to it, not in this panel, but in the exhibition. Can you tell us what that text says?
Sorry?
The text?
The text?
Yeah.
So what they're standing on is words of wisdom that I have collected over the years. And I don't expect the viewer to be able to read it. It's difficult to read. I have a copy of the text if anybody wants to know what it is, but these are words of strength from people that I admire, like Martin Luther King, etc. And they're quotes that I've gathered over the years. So I'm trying to give the figures strength as they stand and try to decide what to do with these words of wisdom.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. We're about to reach the 1 hour mark, but I wanted to give everybody the opportunity, if there's any last words, last questions that you might have for each other, now would be the time.
I feel honored to be amongst such wonderful art. Every piece is very meaningful, each for its own unique voice, and I just feel lucky to have been able to be part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I feel too that Lucie, having a program like this is really, really good, because it gives an audience the chance to actually hear from the artist directly, and a chance to really look at a piece in great detail. Because I think a lot of people walk through a gallery, and it's sad how they will walk by pieces without going up to them, without, if they don't grab them, they don't go up. And so much of fiber art is experienced from up close. Not all, but I'd say most of it. You have to be up close, and you have to take the time to really appreciate it. So it's wonderful to have programs where fiber artists are able to articulate their thoughts, their processes, and thank you very much for providing that to us.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure, and as well on behalf of the AGSM as a whole, not just to have this exhibition here, but to be able to bring these talks to people, because I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that especially in the themes that came up today, that idea of slow making and of connecting to the past through this labor-intensive process, that the slow looking is crucial, is the other half of the lifespan of these objects, right? Is being looked at with care and consideration. So I thank you all so much for your time, and thank you for everyone who has joined us online for joining us. There is one more week, as I said, to take in the exhibition Crossroads, remembering that we have a closed holiday next week. There are catalogs for sale at the AGSM gift shop and also online through the Grand National website. They're wonderful. They're just $10 and they have all 48 artworks inside them with artist explanations and biographies. As always, follow us on social media to get more in depth with the works that you haven't seen today. Thank you for joining us. Artists, thank you again so much for your time and your insight and your wisdom. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.